Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Birmingham, England, the UK's second largest city, known as the first manufacturing town in the world and hailed as a city of 1,000 trades. Listen to the hometown murder cases of Philip Smith, an English spree killer, the murder of Jacqueline Thomas, a 15-year-old biscuit factory worker, and Michael Sams, a kidnapper, extortionist and murderer. The first hometown murders case we're looking at today is Philip Smith. He was a spree killer serving life sentence for the murder of 3 women in Birmingham. He was a former fairground worker, also employed at the Rainbow Pub in Digbeth. He killed over a 4-day period in November 2000. After befriending 2 of the victims at the Rainbow Pub before carrying out his crimes. All 3 of Smith's victims were mutilated, almost beyond recognition, and Smith was quickly identified as the killer because of overwhelming evidence linking him to the deaths. Smith's first victim was Jodie Hyde, a recovering butane gas addict who he met at the Rainbow before killing her hours later. It is thought that he strangled her before setting her body on fire near a recreation ground. 3 days later, he met a mother of 3, Rosemary Corcoran, at the same public house and drove her to a rural location where he bludgeoned her to death and drove over her body. He then drove home. He hit care worker Carol Jordan with his car. Fearing capture, he beat her to death. All 3 bodies were discovered soon after, and Smith was then apprehended by the West Midlands Police, then contacting him to say that he wished to make a statement about Corcoran's disappearance. At the time, however, her body had not been positively identified, and inquiries quickly established that some aspects of his account were false. The murder inquiry made at Operation Green uncovered a large quantity of strong evidence incriminating Smith, but at first he denied responsibility. He maintained his innocence after his trial began in July 2001, but later in the proceedings changed his plea to guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The motive for his crimes were unclear, but police who arrested him believed that a lack of permanent sexual relations was a contributing factor. Detectives also investigated the death of a woman who had been a colleague of Smith at the Rainbow Pub, Patricia Linnott, a divorced mother of 2 from Ireland who had moved to Birmingham but found dead in her flat in October 2000. Police had not treated the death as suspicious, but after they discovered her connection to Smith, her body was exhumed for a second post-mortem. This proved to be inconclusive, and in January 2003, a coroner's jury in Birmingham recovered an altered verdict after hearing that the cause of her death could not be determined. Smith was born in 1965 at the City Maternity Hospital in Gloucester, where he grew up. His family lived in Midland Road and were neighbours of the serial killers Fred and Rose West. an episode that featured the first episode of Hometown Murders. Please listen to that for further information. He then moved to Hales Road in Coney Hill Estate in 1971. Smith attended Coney Hill Infants and Junior School and later went to Specialist School for Children with Learning Disability. After he left school at 14, he joined Billy Danter's Fun Fair, which toured extensively throughout the UK and also employed his father. Smith then moved from Gloucester to Tewkesbury, then to Ross-on-Wye, where he lived with a female partner. They had a son in 1990 and two more in 1992, but Smith left the family and moved to Cardiff, where his relationship became difficult. He spent a year in Ireland lodging with a travelling family who took pity on him while he was hitchhiking in Athlone, County Westmeath. He had told them he was an English gypsy visiting Ireland, and they allowed him to live rent-free in a spare caravan where he contributed to a portion of his unemployed benefit towards food. This family asked Smith to leave when they became uncomfortable about sexual remarks he made to young female members of the family. Smith moved to Birmingham towards the end of 1999 and stayed briefly at Trinity Centre, a hostel for the homeless in Digbeth, before moving to a property managed by a housing association in Braithwaite Road in Sparkbrook district of Birmingham. He was well known locally and a regular patron of the Shamrock Cafe on Stratford Road and the Rainbow Pub in Digbeth, where he employed on a casual basis as an odd jobber and served as an unofficial taxi driver for drinkers. During this time, Smith received over 30 criminal convictions for minor offences, beginning in May 1984, where he was fined for theft. His record included handling stolen goods, burglary, and driving without a licence. At 6'4" and weighing 22 stone, he had a dishevelled appearance and a soft West Country accent. He was considered gentle to those who met him. On the 8th of November 2000, Smith met 21-year-old Jodie Hyde, who was a recovering butane gas addict from Allen Rock, Birmingham, at the Rainbow Pub, where they were soon seen leaving together. He took her to a hospital appointment and later killed her. It is believed he strangled her at his flat and dumped her body near a recreation ground near Golden Hillock Road in Sparkbrook, where he set it on fire. The still smouldering remains were discovered at 6:15 a.m. next morning by two patrolling peace officers. The body was barely recognisable and had to be identified by using fingerprints. A post-mortem concluded she had been strangled but had been rolled up into a carpet and set on fire. 3 days later, Smith met Rosemary Corcoran, a 25-year-old mother of three from Castle Vale, at the same pub, and again they were seen leaving together. He drove to Worcestershire before bludgeoning her to death and running over her body near Droitwich Spa. She was found at 8:30 a.m. on the 12th of November by a man walking his dog in a lane near Junction 5 of the M5 motorway. Smith's third victim was Carol Jordan, a 39-year-old care worker and mother of six from Borshaw Heath. She was killed as she walked to work. Smith hit her from behind with his car while driving back from Worcestershire, fracturing her hip. Fearing that he would be caught, Smith moved her to another location and beat her so much that dental records were required to identify her corpse. The body was discovered at 8:50 a.m. on the 12th of November on Parkland next to Bell Barn Road, Lee Bank. Smith's trial began at Leicester Crown Court on the 3rd of July 2001 and he pleaded not guilty to all three charges. On the 17th of July, Smith complained of feeling unwell with chest and eye pain while under cross-examinations, and proceedings were briefly halted while he was treated for symptoms of a panic attack. Smith returned to the witness stand. He said he wished to speak to his barrister. Presiding Judge Rafferty told him he must answer questions, to which replied, "I want to change my plea. I'm fed up with this. I want to change my plea." The charges were read to him again the following day and he pleaded guilty. On the 18th of July 2001, Smith was sentenced to life imprisonment. In January 2005, Birmingham Sunday Mercury newspaper reported Smith had decided to change his plea after police agreed to return £400 confiscated from him during a raid on his flat after his arrest, and he wanted the money to buy Mars bars in prison. As a result of their inquiries into Smith's background, police launched an investigation into the death of a fourth woman who was discovered to have had links to him. Patricia Linnott, a 47 divorced mother of two, moved to Birmingham from Athlone during the mid-90s. In October 2000, while she was still employed at the Rainbow Pub as a cleaner and took after licensed children, she was found dead in a bedroom of her flat on Maxstoke Street, Bordsley Green. Police at first thought she had died of natural causes. A post-mortem failed to establish cause of death, and her body was returned to Ireland for burial. An inquest into Linnott's death was held at Birmingham Commoners Court in January 2003. Marks were found on her back and her arm, which may have been bruising, but the pathologist also conducted the original post-mortem could not be sure how she had died. It said that, despite her connection with Smith, police and four pathologists had failed to establish that Linnott had been murdered. The coroner returned an open verdict. Police also conducted a re-examination of other unsolved murder cases dating back 20 years in areas where Smith had lived. Officers from West Midlands Police held a conference in October 2001 with representatives from several other forces, including West Mercia and Gloucestershire, to share information about unsolved murder cases in their areas. Detectives interviewed Smith 3 times, but he refused to answer their questions, and no further charges were ever brought. The second hometown murders case we're looking at is the murder of Jacqueline Thomas. She was born either in 1945 or 1946, and at the time of her death she was thought to be 14 or 15 years old. She was a biscuit factory worker from Allen Rock, Birmingham, and she was sexually assaulted and strangled after disappearing on the 18th of August 1961. Her body was discovered a week later, close to her home, and the murder sparked a manhunt involving several hundred police officers. The suspect was identified at the time, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him, and the crime remained unsolved for over 4 decades until a cold case review in the 2000s. In 2007, 70-year-old Anthony Hall, already serving a life sentence for the murder of another teenager, was charged with Thomas's death. However, a judge subsequently ruled the charge should be stayed owing to the length of time that had been passed since the incident. Hall has died in prison since. Jacqueline Thomas worked at Birmingham's Hughes biscuit factory and lived with her family in the Allen Rock area of the city, where she was one of 8 sisters. On Friday, the 18th of August 1961, she attended a fun fair at nearby West Ward End with friends and failed to return home afterwards. She was last seen around 10:30 p.m. talking to a young man. Her family reported her missing when she did not return home. A week later, on the 25th of August 1961, a dog walker found her body hidden in undergrowth at disused allotments close to her house in Everton Road. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Police believe she had been dead for several days and that her death had occurred at the allotments. They found no evidence of a struggle. The ensuing murder investigation involved several hundred police officers who visited more than 1,000 homes in the area and conducted interviews with local residents as well as Thomas's colleagues and workers from the fair where she had last been seen. Police launched a postal appeal while a request for information was made at the city's St Andrew's Stadium during a football match between Birmingham City and Leicester City. Witnesses record Thomas speaking with a young man at the fair. He was subsequently identified as 24-year-old Anthony Hall, a married father of one. He admitted being at the fairground with Jacqueline Thomas on the evening of her death and that they had embraced and kissed, but he denied killing her. He asked his mother to provide a false alibi because he did not want his wife to know that he'd been larking about with girls. Although he was considered a suspect, Hall was not charged with the murder as there was no evidence linking him to the crime. At an inquest later that year, he was called as one of 53 witnesses to give evidence, asking his solicitor to put him in the witness box. Quote, "Though he may not be an angel, he wants the finger of suspicion which has been levelled at him removed." End quote. A jury subsequently recorded a verdict of murder by some persons or persons unknown. During the cold case review, as part of their effort to routinely re-examine evidence from unsolved cases, West Midlands Police Major Crime Review Team revisited the investigation in early 2007. Advances in DNA technology made it possible to identify fresh evidence. Documents from the Jacqueline Thomas investigation were studied by detectives, and the case file was closely examined by lawyers from the Crown Prosecution Service. In November 2007, a decision was made to charge Hall with the Jacqueline Thomas murder, and he appeared at Birmingham Magistrates Crown Court on the 29th of November 2007. He again denied having anything to do with her death and was remanded in custody. At a hearing at Birmingham Crown Court on the 19th of August 2003, Judge Frank Chapman ruled that Hall could not stand trial for the murder because the events occurred too long ago, and any case against Hall would not be fair and balanced. Chapman told the court that since 1961, 21 witnesses had died, while others had either not been traced or were too ill to attend a trial. Moreover, police had kept no evidence and records from the investigation, and because of the passage of time, Chapman believed it was unlikely those witnesses could give evidence would be able to record events with sufficient clarity for it to be reliable. Subsequently, he stayed proceedings against Hall. Outlining the essential case against the suspect, he said that it rested on two significant points: Jacqueline Thomas's time of death and the last person seen with her beforehand. Quote, "If they, the prosecution, had turned up as something new, it would have made all the difference, or may have done." End quote. Following the hearing, a member of the Major Crime Review Team commented, quote, "Clearly we are not looking for anybody else, but we respect the decision of the court." End quote. On the 6th of December 2011, Anthony Hall died at a hospice following long-term illness. He was remanded in custody at the time of his death. The last hometown murders case we're looking at is Michael Sams. He was born the 11th of August 1941. He was a kidnapper, extortionist and murderer. He kidnapped Julie Dart in July 1991 and later murdered her after she tried to escape. He subsequently kidnapped Stephanie Slater in January 1992 and eventually released her after payment of a ransom. According to Slater, she was raped during her imprisonment, but Sam denied this. After Sams was convicted and imprisoned, he continued to commit offences, attacking a female probation officer. He also became notorious for his attempts to sue the prison, initially successfully for losing his artificial leg, and then because his bed was too hard. Michael Sams was born and grew up in Keighley, West Riding of Yorkshire. He joined the Merchant Navy at the age of 20. After 3 years, he returned to Keighley and worked as a light lift engineer, graduating to become a central heating engineer, later setting up his own company. However, Sams turned to crime and was first imprisoned in 1976 for auto theft and making a false insurance claim. While in prison, Sams was diagnosed with a cancer that led to the amputation of one of his legs. After his release, Sams was forced to sell his ailing business and took a job for Black & Decker. He later started a new business in the 1980s selling power tools. Sams was married 3 times. He had 2 sons by his first wife, but the marriage broke down shortly before he was sent to prison. His second marriage also ended in divorce. At the time of his arrest for the kidnappings, he lived in Sutton-on-Trent, Nottinghamshire, with his 3rd wife. On the 9th of July 1991, Sams drove to a local red light area and picked up a prostitute named Julie Dart, an 18-year-old Leeds resident. She was blindfolded and taken to Sam's warehouse, where she placed in a coffin-like box and chained to the floor. According to Sam's later confession, Dart smashed her way out of the box in an attempt to escape, but was unable to get out of the room. Sams, who had wired an alarm to the box, returned to chain her to a roof beam. The following day, Sams forced Dart to write a letter to her boyfriend demanding a ransom of £140,000 or the hostage would never be seen again. He also made her write other notes. After the notes were written, Sams murdered Dart with a hammer. 9 days later, he dumped her body in a field in Easton, Lincolnshire. Since it was never likely that Dart's ransom would be paid, it had been suggested that Sams always intended to kill her. Paul Britton, a clinical psychologist who advised the detectives who interviewed Sams, argues that he abducted a prostitute because it would be relatively easy and was good practice. It would also not create too much of a stir. By killing Dart and leaving her body where it could be easily found, Sims would convince the police that he'd been regarded as a serious adversary and intimidate his next victims into paying up. McCready Hunt, however, notes that Sams continues to demand ransom for several days after Dart's death, only dumping her body, initially hidden in a wheelie bin, after the smell became difficult to conceal. Sams continued to send messages to the police. One stated prostitutes are easy to pick up and they won't spend any more time in prison for killing 2 instead of 1. He later claimed that he'd kidnapped another prostitute, but police could find no evidence that any had gone missing. Sams also sent messages stating he would intentionally cause a train crash unless he was paid a ransom. He also attempted to blackmail supermarkets by threatening to poison food. Some months later, on the 22nd of January 1992, Sams kidnapped again. Using a false name, he arranged to meet Stephanie Slater, an estate agent, ostensibly to view a property in Turbury Road, Great Bar, Birmingham. At the property, he attacked Slater, tied her up and then took her to his workshop. Sams again demanded a ransom, this time from Slater's manager at the estate agency. When it was paid, Sams released Slater. Given his previous crime, police had expected the kidnapper to kill Slater. They hoped to stop him by following him after he picked up the ransom, but Sams had anticipated this and devised an elaborate scheme to successfully give them the slip. Sams was interviewed in 2013 on BBC Radio's 4's 1-to-1 programme. He said that for 8 days she was held, or Slater was interviewed, and that for 8 days she was held, handcuffed, legs bound, blindfolded and gagged in a coffin inside a wheelie bin laid horizontally. Sams had told her she would be electrocuted if she tried to move. Slater said that she was allowed out of the coffin for food. She chatted about herself to Sams to humanise herself and to increase her chances of survival. Within 12 hours of her release, she was made to face a police press conference, even though she was still drugged and highly distressed. Police later acknowledged this was an error of judgment. On the BBC television programme Crime Watch, the police made a public tape recording the kidnapper's voice, which was recognised by Sam's first wife. Sams was arrested and forensic evidence was gathered of his responsibility for Dart's murder. He was convicted in July 1993 and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Dart and the abduction of Slater. A Upon being positively identified by Slater, Sams admitted the kidnapping but denied the murder charge in court. He confessed to the murder in prison 3 days after he was found guilty. Out of the £175,000 ransom, which was paid for the release of Slater, police located £150,000 of it, buried in a field by using ground-penetrating radar. The remaining £25,000 was never recovered. Following her release, Slater felt unable to return to work as an estate agent and moved to the Isle of Wight in 1993. She subsequently worked with police forces in the Isle of Wight to advise them on how to deal with kidnapped survivors and with the survivors themselves to help them recover from their ordeals. She died on the 31st of August 2017, aged 50, from cancer. Sams continued to offend after he was imprisoned, attacking a female probation officer with a metal spike. He received an additional 8 years to his term for this act. Sams was awarded £4,000 damages when the prison service lost his artificial leg during a transfer. The award caused considerable public outrage. He also brought a civil case because he believed that his prison bed was too hard. A further complaint that he was unfairly held in solitary confinement, leading to a loss of earnings, and that works of art he had painted in prison had gone missing. He made the news again in April 2007 when, in an open letter to the Inside Time, a newspaper for prisoners, he claimed that OAPs in prison are far better off than those in the community. Sams remains in prison, having served 28 years of his life sentence. No recommended minimum term was reported at his trial, and it is unknown whether any Home Secretary or High Court judge subsequently ruled how many years Sams must serve before he can be considered for parole. Now aged 79, he is amongst the oldest and longest serving life sentencing prisoners in England and Wales. In her 1995 book about her ordeal, Beyond Fear, My Will to Survive, Slater wrote that Sams raped her on the first night of her imprisonment. After her release, Slater had denied that she had been raped. She later said that this was to spare her mother, who had a heart condition, from unnecessary further anguish. Sams denied raping Slater, asserting, quote, "I cannot allow this to go unchallenged," end quote. He made the unsubstantiated claim that he had a consensual affair. Sams attempted to sue Slater for libel but lost the case. Crime writer Christopher Berry D, in Unmasking Mr. Kipper, Who Really Killed Susie Lamprey, has put forth the case that Sams killed estate agent Susie Lamprey in 1986, but this has been dismissed by the police. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help.